All right, it's 4:30. We're going to go ahead and call the Education Committee to order. So we're going to go ahead and open up our meeting. It says here also that Commissioner Herbert should open up the budget meeting as well.
I'd like to have the budget committee, please. Everybody remember to silence their phones.
And I'd like to lodge a formal complaint that I don't have a gavel.
That was not purchased with county money, sir.
Amazon.
All right, first up is citizens communication. Do we have any for today?
No, sir.
Seeing none, our first order of business is to approve the minutes from December 16, 2024. Is there a motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. First item of agenda is the WCS General Purpose School Fund. This is not something we're voting on today, so I think we'll just do a presentation and questions. So I open it up to presentation for the school.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, commissioners, for being here for us. We actually have a short PowerPoint. I want to emphasize short from Rachel. It's a synopsis of the first 2 pages, the introductory memo that Rachel gave you. I'm going to give you a couple of just basics of this. Number one, we project that our student enrollment numbers will be 0.44% less than last year. That's what we base this budget on. Generally speaking, we project a slight increase in middle school population, decrease in elementary with high school being about the same. Largely what we're seeing is, and this is going to be the 3rd year of a trend, more high school seniors graduating than kindergartners coming in. That's regional, aggregate, but we have seen growth at the elementary level in parts of the county and a more substantial reduction in other parts of the county. So it's not directly a budget issue, but from a zoning perspective, we're seeing, in regions, we're seeing a difference than the aggregate. So as part of that, on the budget side, our budget proposals include, number one, a reduction in staffing from last year, because we went back and looked at every single position, our projections for each individual school. So we do have a reduction in staffing, and we have actually reduced our operations budget by about $1 million. Just as a reminder, about 86% of our total expenditures are people, 16% ops, operations. So we've reduced operations a little bit related to that slight reduction in student population. But for a computer replacement cycle. And those of you who've been on the commission for a number of years know that there have been times we've had computers in capital, sometimes we've had them in operations. The replacement devices for grades 3 through 5 are in our plan. We also include in that, after much discussion at the board level, carts, which would allow our students not to have to take them home every single day. Which we believe is ultimately a good thing for our students to reduce some passive computer time. So again, from a budget perspective, reduction in staffing, a little bit of reduction in operations, but for the computers. Rachel's going to give you some detail on both the revenue and expense side, but I wanted you to be aware of those basics as we start.
May I just ask a question real quick for clarification? When you say you reduce it from last year, you mean the current operating?
Thank you, from the current year. I'm already thinking ahead.
I understand,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, not from the 23-24 year, but from the 24-25 budget, current budget.
And so we will be going over, just to remind you, 4 different funds: general purpose, central cafeteria, student age childcare, which is extended school program, and annual capital. So when you do vote, which again, today is not the voting meeting, but you will have 4 separate votes on each one of these sections. And we will start with kind of going through, as Mr. Golden said, what's on the memo and then what's in your actual budget packet. And the first section is related to enrollment, which he's kind of already covered, is that projected is the top section. Where we are currently is below that. And so you can see where that slight decrease is coming in. Have any other? I'll go through each section like this, and then if you have questions specifically about enrollment, if you want to jump in, feel free.
I have a couple of questions. Jason, do you think the drop in your K-12, and I was just looking at your numbers for elementary, do you think that's a result of the high property values and the interest rates, or kids, or the young people a little slower moving into the community in middle school and high school?
We believe that's it. We believe it's the cost of housing. There's been a long time kind of private model where often families across the country are okay with elementary schools, and then they might, public, and then they might move to a private setting. It's a small percentage nationally, but we suspect there's some of that families are saving up money to move in a little bit later. We do see growth in 9 of our 12 grade levels, but the kindergarten is substantially smaller. So yeah, I do think the price point is a big issue. And of course, families would do the math on a mortgage and figure out how much they can afford.
Can I ask a few questions on the enrollment?
Sure.
So I did notice, when you kind of reduced some of the capacity in some of the schools, and some of my, it was like 10, 20, but there are a few that kind of stuck out to me. The College Grove, went down 160 seats, Brass went down 90 seats, Scales went down 110 seats. I'm probably most concerned about College Grove because we do have development that's happening over there.
Yeah.
And I know we've kind of had some, Arrington, I think is almost 100% now.
Yeah.
And now we've lost seats at College Grove. Can you kind of explain that to me? Because we might need the room.
Sure, I'll get Mr. King to explain that when we went back and reviewed all our longstanding numbers. But you're right about that part of the county is growing at the elementary level. Arrington is in its second year and already close to being full. And in Creekside, just a little further east that serves Ladd Park, it has a good population as well.
Right.
Brian, could you speak to I'm sorry, Rachel.
Can I say one thing? I should have said this too. Enrollment, if you're looking through your board, the packet is on page 7 where you can see what Ms. Smith was referring to, where it's got our projected enrollment and then what the capacities are for those buildings.
So Brian, if you would speak to that process.
So we went back and did a capacity study because it hadn't been done in years, and there's been a lot of things added with the tier 2 and the interventionists and some of that stuff from the state. So that was the main reason we did it, but we also reviewed the floor plans to make sure all that matched. And there were a couple of schools, and we don't know why, because it was before Eric and I were in our positions, that the rooms just weren't right. There's been some additions like at College Grove, and what was down for the number of classrooms was not correct. So there were a handful, 2 or 3 schools, there were some pretty major adjustments, and it was because going back however many years, the number of classrooms were not correct.
I guess what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is that last year or before Arrington Elementary was actually built, College Grove had over 700 students. So, and I don't believe, were we using portables?
We were.
Okay, how many portables do we have?
I can't remember off the top of my head. We'll get you that. I'm guessing 3, but maybe 4. But yes, we did have portables.
Yeah, because obviously we want to make sure that, as these developments happen, that we have facilities,
Sure,
for, again, I don't know how many young families will be moving into that area. It's become really expensive in College Grove and Arrington. So I know it's probably not the elementary that's going to be hard. I was also going to ask about Page Middle, because Page Middle obviously I think they're at 100% right now. But Legacy on the other side is got quite a bit of room for students. Are we looking at possible any rezoning for the middle school, or looking at keeping 6 graders back in elementary, or how to address that?
There is the potential for rezoning. I've spoken to the commission over the years I've been here, not even just in my superintendent's position, but in my deputy superintendent's position, where we will look at rezoning before we make a request of you for funding for a new school. So that is definitely a possibility. Legacy is somewhere around 13 miles drive from Page. But the east part of the zone is closer. So yes, we will be going through that. We've talked about it briefly with the school board, but realistically, we know that it's not appropriate to make a request of you for a new school if we haven't addressed that potential.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on our enrollment projections?
Jason, are we seeing regionally outside of Williamson County sort of the same trend? Or do you know?
I don't have good data on that. I have some anecdotes. For example, I know that Wilson County is in the process of looking for a property for a new school. Some of those neighbors have seen some growth. Rutherford's actually grown a little bit faster than us. So we have had some discussions about that proverbial price point. Generally speaking, our housing cost and Metro Nashville's housing cost are a little bit above the others that I've seen.
So I had one more question too. So St. Michael's Academy, which is out there in my district also, are we seeing any of like more private schools coming on board that might also be hitting our enrollment numbers?
We do have those requests from private schools annually. We haven't seen a significant amount there. From what we've seen, generally speaking, the percentages haven't changed substantially. So when somebody moves in, the little bit that I've seen indicate that it's probably about the same percentage are going to private as public here. I'm going to give you an estimate without a commitment that this is for sure good numbers. We serve somewhere around 85% of the student population in the county. Based on the request we receive from private schools, actually more accurately, they send us a report and notify, any private school has a responsibility to notify the public school system where the child lives that they have those students. I'm estimating somewhere around 85%. What we don't necessarily have excellent data on is homeschool families. The homeschool umbrellas will send us those notices, but we're not sure if we're getting everything from everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
If we're good with enrollment, we'll move on to personnel. And page 9 in your binder is our PCR, which is the position control report. It's how we use it as a measure using our staffing standards and prior requests for positions. So it's just a cumulative total of who all the positions are, what all the positions are, the numbers. And so what you'll see in this year's PCR is an actual net total reduction of 34.6 full-time equivalents, full-time position equivalents. And you can kind of see where the breakdown, we did have some additions, including librarians at both Nolensville and Page, where their enrollment is high enough with the staffing standard to increase for a librarian. Same thing with assistant principals in Page Middle School and Nolensville Elementary. According to our staffing standards, there should be an increase as well as special ed by 0.85. We have one new position that is being requested in the budget, and that is for an innovation hub specialist. So if you'll remember, we received a state grant related to CTE, and we are using those funds to build an innovation hub.
Sure. This is the position to do the work to prepare that innovation hub to open in fall of '26. Our plan for that is based on funding we received from the governor's budget 2 years ago. We are not spending any county money to build the facility, and it's going to be on the north side of Franklin High School's campus. To me, it's kind of a return to traditional, some of our traditional programs that faded out in the 80s. Diesel and electrical power generation. We're also adding some innovations with aviation programming. We are doing each one of those programs in partnership with somebody, whether it's MTSU or Columbia State or businesses, including trying to remember, I think I've got, is it Cat Diesel?
Yeah.
That Cat Diesel for that program. It is a new position in the budget that is not funded by by the state, but it's what we need to make sure that program works.
I have a question. When you're adding a assistant principal and a half, is there not any since some of the schools are losing, can they not, one of those principals not move over?
We have not had an individual loss in our numbers sufficient under our position control report to reduce.
And the other question is, you're reducing almost 33 regular teachers. That's not, nobody will be laid off. Is it just vacancies? Is that how that's gonna work?
That's correct. We have enough retirements and moves that we do not project that we will need to lay anybody off. Occasionally, there's a specialty position that just has a few positions, but those positions are based on our math of total student numbers at individual schools for gen ed teaching. So short answer, no, we don't believe that will include a layoff because of retirements and moves.
I want to ask another, this is on in the book, but it's about personnel. What is an instructional coach?
An instructional coach are teachers who are teaching teachers and coordinating improvements in instruction. We've gotten questions from the board about that. What we have found is our teachers, especially new teachers, and truthfully, any teacher, has the capacity to grow and needs that coaching. So when our teachers get together and work on making sure that from one side of the hall to the other, students are mastering the standards, and we don't have an education lottery for a student who happens to get a great teacher when there's a teacher across the hall, those coaches are coordinating that work for our teachers. So teachers will have common formative assessments where they're assessing in just quick snapshots how well students are mastering the standards. Then they make adjustments based on what those students show. Coaches help them with pedagogy. Okay, let me give you some examples of how you might teach this particular standard for your students who didn't master it the first time you taught. We've had questions along the lines of, well, could you not just give a supplement to a peer teacher to help them out? And what we found is dedicated coaches in literacy and math can actually move that needle with our teachers more so than somebody who's doing one extra thing. We have found that that's started to be a trend across the state. The state actually separated, Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, in this coming budget year.
And this year.
In this year, a line item for coaches so that they could differentiate.
We'll be coming back to you next month with a budget amendment because the state in their chart of accounts said, please break them out separately. So we'll just be coming with a budget amendment to you for those to move them into the grade.
So it's one of the tools we're using to help grow that 1% more every year by improving teacher quality.
That's a long position, so it's over 100.
It is a lot, and we've been working towards that. When the state went to interventionists, you may recall we started talking about RTI a few years ago. We were combining some of that work with the interventionists who would work maybe with a group of 3 to 5 students on specific deficits. We were combining some of that work with some coaching. What we found over time is that, number one, that's a different skill set, working 1-on-3 with individual students versus teaching teachers. And then second, we found that for us to continue to grow every student, there's value in that. Principals would rave about that. I encourage you to have individual conversations with your principals. If you run into any of them about that, I've given you just a really small snapshot of that. Oh, thank you. Rachel mentioned grow your own. From a licensure standpoint, we have more teachers who are on job embedded licenses as they're transitioning to different jobs, younger teachers, largely because of the staffing shortage. So what we found is that especially some of those teachers need a little additional coaching beyond the old traditional training programs for teachers.
Okay, first I'll talk to some of the principals and get their input. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Our board members have asked similar questions.
Along the same lines, Commissioner Herbert, I've actually talked to some teachers who have actually said that having the coaches there has been extremely beneficial. I've also talked to teachers like, I never see him, so I guess it depends on where you're at. But I was wondering though, because I know a lot of the positions we took out were at the elementary level,
Yeah.
is why we still maintain the same level of coaches. And if there was an opportunity, and I kind of mentioned this to Rachel when we spoke, to, kind of take that down to a half position if their elementary schools were close enough,
Yeah.
that if we could actually share some of those positions across the smaller, less full. Because I mean, if you're at an Arrington Elementary and you're coach, or Trinity, you're probably really busy, but if
Yeah.
you're a Hunter's Bend coach, maybe there's some bandwidth there that you can, so just a thought that I kind of wanted to put out there for you guys to maybe take back to the board and look into.
Thank you for that. We have in our PCR dedicated literacy coach and a math coach at each elementary school, largely because they get to know those teachers and know their strengths and opportunities for growth. And your mention of some say they didn't see it, they haven't seen the coach, and others, they do targeted work. So that may be part of it as well.
The ones that don't see it, it's probably a good thing.
Now with that, we focused with our teachers that every teacher can grow. So that's a theme we talk to them as well.
I'm a little shocked you got less special ed teachers. You're usually always adding special ed teachers.
We had some detailed conversations about that, and special education teachers are driven by IEP needs. And you may recall in past years, especially when we've grown, the last 2 years, it's been a good thing. We haven't come to the budget committee or the ed committee with a lot of mid-year budget changes because of growth. But those special education positions are driven by what we project we will have next year. So the big gap there, or the big, educated guesswork would be kindergarten, with kindergarten students moving in. We have some insight into rising kindergartners who have disabilities, who need services because of our early childhood. Actually, it's not on this slide, but where we serve age 3 and 4. We won't come to them unless we need it, and it's driven by that.
One more comment in addition to that. So Nissan did this really great presentation, and they actually are partnering with schools, I think in the McMinnville School District, and then there's another school district they're partnering with. And they're actually supplying the teaching part of it for free.
Yeah.
And there's no strings attached, so nobody has to go work for Nissan. Nobody has to go work for Nissan, but they're getting this training. And I don't know if we looked into that for Innovation Hub to see if there's corporations that would be willing to have some of their staff step up and do the educational part of it, and at no cost to the school district, other than just getting their name out there in a goodwill partnership.
That's on our plate, and that is something that we shoot for from time to time. As an example, we had that relationship with the Franklin High School auto body project. Service King Collision Repair actually supplied a teacher. So we have had some times where we've been able to do that. For them at the time, it was worth it because they were generating employees because they were dealing with a shortage. In that particular example, they got bought by a company out of Texas, if I'm not mistaken, and that program ended their funding of it. But yes, we do ask.
Sure, Governor Lee would be more than happy to have somebody from Lee Company.
I'm sorry. Oh, fire safety, thank you. Fire safety is one of the programs as well. We're working in conjunction with the city of Franklin. So that'll be a topic that we look at as well. Teacher licensure is an issue for those programs as well, making sure we have the appropriate licensure.
So as you see, there were some reductions, which I think we've covered most of that. Again, these are based off of our staffing standards, which goes back to enrollment. And so again, the net change was a reduction of 34.6 positions. Anything else on personnel with it?
I'm just glad to see this. Instead of adding, you're taking away. Let's go.
Rachel, I'm gonna give TMI, but let me mention one peculiarity of the difference between TISA, our state funding model, and the old BEP. TISA's funding is based on a per student expenditure. The old BEP was based on needs that are school driven. For example, BEP would give a percentage for each principal, a percentage for teachers based on staffing ratios, had to have a librarian in every school. They would fund school by school. TISA funds student by student. So generally speaking, the smaller schools are more difficult to manage based on state funding than they used to be, because the model is per student. So the more students you have in a building, the less gap you have with state funding. So I do project long-term, at least to some percentage mathematically, there'll be an encouragement to have larger schools with the TISA model, because one principal per 2,000 students is very different than one principal per 350.
Yeah. Jason, define 504 coordinator.
Thank you. So 504 plans are federal requirements for students with disabilities who need accommodations as opposed to modifications of the curriculum. So it's a longstanding service to students with disabilities. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and we actually have thousands of students who have 504 plans. And it's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of, if I'm not mistaken, 1972. I'm looking for you guys, you don't know what I'm talking about. But it's the Federal Rehabilitation Act. We have had those positions in the budget for the last 3 years to allow some of the paperwork to be done so that we don't have as many teachers. So the teachers are, it's a little bit more expensive position. So we've got 504 coordinators doing some of the meetings that are demanded by the federal structure to try to be as efficient as we can with the paperwork and meeting requirements of 504.
So 2 questions. One's a follow-up. Rachel, we get federal funding help on the 504s, right?
Not specifically, no.
So the feds send us money down.
A lot of the money that we get federally is gonna be to support student support services, yes, but specifically for 504s, that is something that we have chosen to do. And it is not a directive of here's money specifically for them.
So under the current reduction of public education coming out of Washington, will this funding still be available, do you think?
I received a memo last week from the communications director for the U.S. Department of Ed. The basic, and I can forward that on to you, the basic structure of that memo was we are reducing our bureaucracy. We don't project it's going to affect funding. That's,
To be different every day.
yes, that way yes. Yeah, I think you're right.
That was my question too.
Yeah,
With the dismantling of the DOE, how is that gonna impact how money gets back to the states? I mean, it sounds like he wants it to go more locally, so you'd think the money that they were getting would be pushed back to us. And hopefully that funding would
yeah.
increase.
The short answer is we don't know. But we did get that memo, and it was very general.
The way we receive federal funds now for student support services is it's federal funding, but it comes through the state anyway. It comes through the state software that we have to upload the information to, and then they administer it to us. And so that change is would not be a huge change necessarily in how we actually receive the funding.
How many million do we get from federal funding?
Roughly about 14.
14 million.
And I say roughly because we continue to get it throughout the years. The budgets are not guaranteed, and so they have different fiscal years.
And Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, the vast majority of our federal funding is directed towards students with disabilities. Maybe not 504
95% of it is 5, and then CTE, we do get programs. Any other questions on personnel? If not, we will move on to our general purpose school fund, which is our main largest fund, and I want to hit some revenues. In your packet, page 15 is where this section starts, and that page is a summary page, but I did want to specifically talk about a little bit of our revenues and expenses. Revenue-wise, our 3 largest pots we receive are property tax, sales tax, and then the TISA funding we receive from the state. So property tax-wise, from where we budgeted for 24-25 to 25-26, a huge increase, but that's based off of the value of the penny and what we currently have. I will be honest, Phoebe sent me something today, I believe. And so I did not go back and change the slide. This would be what was in there. I don't know that it really changed a whole lot. So that's what's budgeted, is what's on the right. So a little bit of an increase, and we'll see, where we fall out with property tax, but that's how we budgeted it.
And you all, I'm gonna jump back, you all, I know this, but just in the interest of overkill, those slight increases are largely based on new developments where larger parcels are broken up into smaller and the total value increases. That is apart from reappraisal.
Sales tax is our next biggest bucket. We have, last couple of years, I've budgeted a 3% increase, based off of, a 3% increase off of actual. And so 24, 25, you can see what was budgeted, what I'm projecting to receive in sales tax, assuming, that it stands steady, is on the right at $123 million, which will be our biggest increase in any of our revenue pockets.
What was inflation? Like, we're seeing, you're predicting a 3% increase, what was inflation?
That's a good point.
A lot.
Yeah.
And different sectors are different.
So it doesn't look like our sales tax revenue increase is probably gonna match
It is not.
inflation.
Correct. TISA is the interesting one. So 24, 25, you can see what was budgeted. And within TISA, there's the funding model itself, and then we also get outcomes funding. And so both of these totals that you see include that outcomes funding. And so as you see, it went down, and I want to take just a minute to give further detail as to why we're projecting that number going down. I know you can't see it real well here, and it's one of the reasons I gave you the, don't know that you can see it even better here, but the slide from the first letter we got, we will receive another letter at the end of this week. But with TISA every month, up until June 30, last week of June, we our final estimate, but they will give us an estimate based off of the data that we have currently entered in related to enrollment and our and enrollment in certain programming, including our student support services and CTE and those kind of things. And so the first letter we received the base increased. Let's go back. What is the base? That's how much we get per child. And that's not a valid statement either. It's not how much we get, it's how much is allocated per child. And that went from $7,075 to $7,295.
And let me be clear on that. That base line, that first line where you see that funding of $298 million, that is a projected aggregate from the state that includes state and local expectations. So that first line is not what we're receiving from the state. That's down at the bottom of page 2, actually, what they project they're gonna get from the state. Yes.
Yes.
And there's a 70-30 split statewide. In the aggregate statewide, when they give you the base funding, the structure is the state pays on average 70% of the total base, and they expect the locals to pay 30%. And then you apply the fiscal capacity. So that base is everything before any of those percentages are applied.
And it's broken down. Base is the very top section. And we have unique learning needs, which again, mostly related to special ed, but could also be related to poverty, sparsely populated, those kind of things. The next section down going through is direct, and that's money we receive for specific groups of students related to K-3, those testing for literacy, 4th grade, CTE. So all of that combined then comes back to what they're saying. Total, this is the funding based off of this formula that we're saying you should receive. So I'm going to go to the next. This is the second page of the letter that we get on the left side. And they are currently calculating, and Mr. Golden spoke to this at the top. They say, again, the state's going to pay for 70% statewide. All the counties, 30% statewide will fund a portion. But then fiscal capacity gets applied to that. We also do have applied to it the split that we have between Williamson County schools and FSD schools. And so that comes into the next section down. But where it's circled in red, that's the current fiscal capacity they have. That's last year's. That's 24-25's. We will not get this number until May. And so fiscal capacity, the formulas for it are based on things like your property value, your median household income, the property's taxes that are actually paid. And so the anticipation, and if you look in the gray box kind of in the middle, our fiscal capacity has gone up 0.1% over the last 3 years. And so I've gone ahead and done this calculation, assuming we're gonna go up 0.1. It may be more, it may be less, but I can't imagine it being less. And so that's why we wanted to go ahead and account for it. Last year, if you'll remember, we came back to you in May. The projected TISA number was 178 million, and in June, it was 176. That $2 million reduction was due to fiscal capacity.
And Rachel was actually closer to 2.5.
It was, and we just did not want to get caught again thinking we're gonna have revenue that then we don't have. And so, what you see on the right side of the spreadsheet, where I've taken the exact same calculation, but I put in a fiscal capacity of the 6.8 as opposed to the 6.7 that they're using.
So our blue box that Rachel was describing describes the last 3 years to give the basis for her projection for this next year's change of fiscal capacity. I do want to mention that 6.74 and the 6.84 in this context. Our Williamson County has about 4.2% of the total state public school population, right in that area, 4.2%. We are treated as if we are responsible for local funding for 6.74% of the total, or 6.84, just to give you a visual.
And so what you'll see again in the little orange box on the far right side is what we're calculating now based on using a higher fiscal capacity than what they have versus what they have, and that's the $2 million difference. And so that's why you're going to see a reduction in TISA for us this year, is that our enrollment is down a little bit, and then that fiscal capacity factor, it plays a huge part. So just wanted you to know that's, again, they could come back, our fiscal capacity could be higher. The state has said they understand that it's hard for us to not be able to budget for this because we get that fiscal capacity later, but they depend on the counties turning in all the property and tax assessments and collections from the year before. So they understand it, but they don't know that they can get it to us any faster. If they get them all in, and because this is collective for the state, you have to have the entire state reporting. You can't just have your district reporting because of it being split statewide.
I guess what bothers me is if we got this would be the same as vouchers, but we get so much less than anybody gets paid that.
Roughly speaking,
usually a
if I
voucher.
broke this out, we would get, and this is including all of the things that we get for unique learning needs and the outcomes, we would get about $4,300 a student.
More.
That would would be what we get on average is about $4,300 a student.
So if you would, Rachel, to answer that question, can you go back one? So you see the base, the annual wage, 7,295, which is, it's that first number in the top left, 7,295. That's the base amount that state government is notified everyone they intend to fund for the ESAs or the vouchers. We are getting somewhere around 4,300 to 4,400 total. So you're right about that.
And that's average.
We would have to have tax increase for how many years if we could get what they're giving people for vouchers? We're punished for doing well.
I think to your point, Commissioner Herbert, we also, the thing that I think that's missing from their formula is the cost of living in our county. So there's a fiscal capacity to take money from everyone across the county, but it doesn't help our teachers be able to afford to live
Well, that's a good
in the
point.
county.
Yeah.
So it's a flawed formula in my perspective.
The formula is very complicated. It's actually two separate formulas.
For fiscal.
For fiscal capacity. It's CBER and TASER, if you ever hear the acronyms, those are the two, CBER and TACIR. Part of the formula includes demographic data on individual income. It includes real property values. It's a lot of things that really have nothing directly to do with schools. For them to develop that fiscal capacity.
Another quick question. So I think you're saying the total from the state then is going to be at the 182.
Correct, because that includes outcomes. We're keeping the outcomes just the same as as what's been given.
I was hearing that there's possibly another $4 million that might be coming.
So we would, yeah, so we actually have been notified that there's a grade letter bonus is what it's called, and it's actually not related to TISA. And so it's not part of the TISA formula, and will have its own separate line, but it is a grade letter, bonus.
Sure. So Senator Johnson spoke with our school board maybe in January, and he was working on something that might mitigate the negative impact of the fiscal capacity formula. What he came up with was a letter grade bonus, and the basic structure of it is any school system that has 50% or more of their schools with an A under a formula that's actually in its second year would get a bonus based on that. And we have been notified by the state that we will receive approximately $4 million for that. So I want to, Senator Johnson isn't here, but I want to thank him for doing that. It's going to be a year-by-year thing, but our net that we have in this slide deck for our total gap in funding already includes that. So we went down from about a $16 million gap that Rachel's going to speak to a $12 million gap.
Okay, so that's included.
So
It's
that's
included.
It's not included in TISA because it's not TISA.
It's not part of TISA, and then also the Department of Education, the fiscal side of it has also told us not to budget for it. That it would be one of those things that's gonna be a year by year. Well, if they're planning on keeping it in the budget, it could be year by year. And they would not recommend that we go ahead and budget. So what we will do with this, once we receive the money, we will come back with a budget amendment for our current 24-25 to accept the funds in, and then it'll go into fund balance.
And I guess to Commissioner Herbert's point too, because obviously the state's said that $72.95, if I'm a private school student in Williamson County and I apply for the ESA, I can get $72.95, but if I decide to go to public school, my public school is only gonna get $4,300 for that student. Is there anything going on to kind of close that gap that we're aware of?
I'm not aware.
I'm not aware of anything other than that example from the Senator Johnson to do with fiscal capacity.
So then in total, looking at revenue as a whole, the top line shows you what we're budgeting is at $5,501,761,510. Numbers, percentages are about the same as they have been over the last several years. 62.64% of our budgeted revenue is coming locally, with 36.75 state, and then we have a little bit federal and other, and the other is things that we take in. It could be donations, it could be tuition that we charge for students that are coming from out of county, and that only happens when houses are being built. In between, or if someone is graduating, people moved out, we'll keep them in, we can charge tuition. So there, that's what the other is, it's just a whole group, it's interest, it's a lot of different things that make up that number. But as you can clearly see, the bulk of our revenues come from the local side.
I have a question. Does Williamson County pay a higher percentage for their students versus any other county in the state? Are we the highest? Or does any other county pay a higher percentage locally?
Oh, based on fiscal capacity?
Well, yeah.
Are we paying like that 62.64?
Right, is anybody else paying
I
any
don't know
higher
the
than
answer to
that?
that. I don't know the answer to that. That's a,
Commissioner Webb did that research last year. You were the
Right,
highest.
the state, Department of Education puts out, I believe it's called Formal Report 19, I'm seeing it this year. The last one that it was us and Franklin Special School were right together at the least funded by the state, and then Sevier County was right on our tail. Sevier County has so much sales tax, with their motel tax. But it's, Madam Chair, since I was asked that question, let me also make a point, the last slide, we have 4% of the student population in the state of Tennessee. Williamson County taxpayers are paying 6% of the total population in the state of Tennessee. That is significant in my opinion. Thank you.
if I may, I suspect there may be some city school systems that are close in percentage. Because Many of them have an additional tax on top of the county, but I'm not aware of any more than that 62%. Traditionally, the city schools have a higher percentage of local funding.
That's terrible. I was reading, I mean, really?
So this is not for you guys, but I'm just, since Phoebe's sitting away from me, I can't lean into her. I hadn't thought about it. You explained a minute ago, Rachel. So last year, the county lost approximately 4 million, a little over 4 million, it seemed like 4.2. Because of the reassessment, and that was called, help me out, Paul. That's it, who said it? The equalization. We're going to lose another 4 million plus this year. When these numbers are put out by the state, do they just take the actual, or do they take the 23? Last time we would have done a, let's see, it'd have been 4 years ago, wouldn't it? Anyway, to get to that number, is there a reduction? Because what we're talking about is trying to come up with 4 million last year, we lost 4 million this year. That's $8 million worth of values, real dollars. Does state take that in consideration?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they do or not. I mean, it's something we can definitely look at. The formula's out there. It's a lot. There's a lot of lines to it.
You know, and you've got a question over there, but you've got a big push to try to do more frequent reappraisals. Well, we're a prime example when you don't have that. What happens to your budget dollars? And I suspect those budget dollars from the state are not taking into consideration what happened. I don't know that for a fact. You got Commissioner Lawrence.
Commissioner Lawrence?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, so are you referring to the ratio studies, or mostly commercial? Okay, so I talked with Brad Coleman about that, and he said he expected when we did reappraisals this year that would actually increase our revenues. Roughly, maybe as much as $13 million based off of the ratios that he used in the past. He's not here tonight to talk to that, but so you anticipate the reappraisal is not gonna increase it? It's gonna actually decrease it? Why would that be?
Because it won't be set by the time we have to go to the market. We'll get the reappraisal, which will be in May, but I'm talking about our real hardcore numbers from 24.
Yeah, Mayor, our county assessed value for the month of March is lower than it was in the month of
Yeah.
February. And those are actual assessed values that I received from the property assessors to calculate. So we're actually down, our total county assessed breakdown is actually less than what it was last month. Not by much, but it is less than total assessment.
Is that due to commercial primarily?
And a lot of it's due to the state properties, the state assessed properties. So those are seeing a decrease. So those are like the railroads, utilities, the things that the state actually appraises. Their numbers do not come out usually until January of 26 is probably their next full assessment. And I could be mistaken, but that's usually about when we see whether it goes up or down. But right now, I'm showing a small decrease in general fund.
Commissioner, normally we see from July to into December, which comes out in January, February. We see, traditionally, we have been seeing at least a 0.5 to 0.75 growth. And that's Some years, we've even had as much as 1% in a 6-month window. The last, nearly whatever March is, whatever period that time is, that'd be 12 plus 7. We're actually losing values, and we all know that's not accurate. But it's because of that reappraisal adjustment that you have to make, state law. So a house that goes in and hold the values up, but the house that's on the books is gonna drop down because we've not had a more frequent reappraisal. And that's state law. But it'd be interesting to see what Rachel's numbers are showing and what we're seeing from Brad's office and our office, how that works out. No question, we're gonna see valuations increase this year. But it's tough to lose $8 million in 2 years when you look at this, even though he's cut back.
So my understanding is the ratios go away though, when you do the reappraisal.
Eventually, they will for that year.
So that's gonna help us next year, not
That's
this year.
correct.
Okay.
Which means we've got to show, the bottom line, last year, we took quite a bit of money out of fund balance. I mean, you all know that because you voted for it. We took quite a bit of money out of fund balance to make that number work. And, tax increases are a dirty word all across the state, and particularly in this county, but it takes a lot of money to make up $4 to $8 million. Even though what Jack did is most appreciative to get in there, roll up his sleeves, because we clearly lost 2.5 last year in the last 30 days. And that meant we had to do something because we have to have a deadline met by July 1 or whatever that date was that you guys, and so Phoebe was working late. A lot of people working late make that $2.5 million, because that was a lot of late night work to make those numbers work, so we didn't have a tax increase.
And Mr. Mayor, to that point, Rachel's, that blue box she had in that previous slide, that 0.1 is a projection because we won't know that probably.
That's correct. We're kind of like the horse race. We may show, but we're not gonna win.
Is there anything we can do to make sure whatever they're using is the most accurate data when they're actually putting together that fiscal capacity? Is there any updated information we can give them?
They don't get that information from us. For example, Tasser gets their information from other sources. Mayor, I know you've been involved in that.
Yeah, I'm on Tasser. We get it, but Tasser just a clearing house. They get it from the comptroller and property assessor and all that. But it'd be great if they could use the latest and greatest, but a lot of counties, we still got a lot of counties, Commissioner, that are doing reappraisals in 5 and 6 years. I think the state minimum is 6. Does that sound right? Maybe 5 years? And we're trying to get it down to 3 and 4 years, but the opposite side of that street, people are saying, well, you're increasing our taxes. Well, you're really not. You're just reassessing those taxes on those values that you've got. But, last year Phoebe helped me out, it was like 0.65, 0.66. I know we argued about this. We lost 35%. That's hard to make up. But the only answer is more frequent assessment.
Any other discussion on the revenue?
All right, just one quick clarification, I guess, on the property taxes, when you estimate that, are we still kind of just going with that 93%?
Yeah, we budget 92%.
Okay. Because I noticed like the actual was like 501 million.
It's not, we do a 92% based off of the last version of the penny with a little calculation that we use for years of a possible increase in then achieve. So it's not gonna be an exact, it's not gonna look totally like it's exact 92 from prior year.
I guess what I just wanted to make sure is like, when we look at your budget, there is a potential that 8% of the, or 7%, I think, or 98%. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner, that actually was mentioned in the memo, I'm actually trying to find it, just as a reminder to you all.
But that's a
starts on page
one-time
384.
then it's gone. And if you're during a recession, you don't have that to fall back on, which we've seen happen. That was Commissioner Smith.
So the net effect is, it goes into fund balance for next year.
So has this school, but this has nothing to do with your budget, but since your chairman's here, I'd like to put in a plug that there's a bill on the Hill that you all would not support, and that's the trust fund to put a certain amount of money, certain percentage of money into a trust. And the county commissioners would not have access to that. If that bill goes through, and there's a good possibility that it will, I mean, on your own numbers here, we're setting aside 16 million for 3%, which it's a requirement. It's not a law, but it is a requirement. But the trust fund, they got up on it. Are you familiar with it, Josh?
I'm not.
There's a bill on the Hill that they want. Paul, do you know what that number was?
I don't have it with me. It's the state rep from Perry County. I think it's 234, but I'm not 100% sure.
I've read the bill.
Are you?
I will tell you, based on just looking at my reading of the bill in isolation from anything else without fully grasping what it means, my reaction was, it's hard for me to visualize a school system that would get approval from county government for funding something when they have money sitting there. That was.
Well, I
Now,
think,
if we could put that in and actually earn some interest, there may be some value in that.
I would submit, if I was a county commissioner, whatever you got set in your fund balance, your budget's got that much reduction right out of the gate.
Right. That's my take on it. You nailed my take.
And I can't imagine any organization, now there are some school systems that do not put into 3%. I get that. That's not what the law says. But if you all had 16 million in a fund balance on 3%, I'd say that the county commission ought to start at 16 million less, spend your money in the bank. But we can't do that.
So maybe there's some value in that. It would be worth us talking to Phoebe about.
Well, I don't know if Phoebe knows that this is a new bill. I'll tell you what I would do. I'd go after the maintenance of effort.
Yeah.
I'd go right at the heart of your entire funding, and that would be the maintenance of effort. That'd be my take on it, Mr. Chairman. And so if it gets passed,
It's permissive.
that's true, and I could see school boards wanting to have that extra money. The county commission, the executive branch, the 24, make the final decision and not sticking away some money on the side.
Well, my question when I read it was, where's the money coming from?
What's coming from us through you that you put into a trust fund, it's an irrevocable, it only can be used by schools, but that doesn't.
House Bill 224.
Huh?
House Bill 224.
Is that what it is? 224, there you go.
May I ask you a question?
I don't know if I can answer it.
It is effectively the fund balance, the 3% is being set aside anyway as a reserve. It's not being used, generally speaking, year to year anyway, right? So there's the technicality of it being in a trust versus not being in a trust, but effectively you're not using the money either way. I'm not arguing for it, I'm just suggesting that the spirit of it might be that you're setting money aside for a specific purpose, but we're not historically using our fund balance year over year anyway, right, Rachel?
The only thing about it is that during the year, we could drop below that 3%. It
That's
just
right.
has to be 3% by the end of the year. So there could be times when we did need to make a purchase. We had an emergency, we could go in and do it using fund balance to do that. And then just know that there may be something we cut out of the budget, we don't spend, to adjust back for it by the end of the year. So you wouldn't have that capability.
With our growth stabilizing the last few years, we haven't had to do that. But during some of those high growth years, we have. But to your point, I share that thought. If there's something that could earn interest, it might be worth looking at.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for it, I'm just, I guess I understand the principle of it.
But relationally, yeah, you would need to know we actually had that money.
Well, and the other thing
Commissioner
about
Torres?
it. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Herbert. But the way I understood it when Paul brought it to my attention, and I talked to Representative Reeves and Representative Bolso last week, my understanding is that 3% was being pulled out of your operational budget, and it was being earmarked for capital expenses in this trust. So, you know, when I kind of dug in on it and talked with Commissioner Webb, it was kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. And then, once that money was in that trust, it's locked up unless you're using it for one of those specific uses.
I think the logic of it is, Mr. Chairman and Superintendent, is in this county, we've been able to have fund balance and rotate and transfer money. There are probably some systems that if they had a major tornado go through, they didn't have the capital to fix the roof or whatever. But that was supposed to be the intent of the 3%. Now, $16 million is a lot of money, but it's not a lot when the roof's ripped off from the school. But I think jockeying money reminds me of the conversation that most of us have heard is it's on sale, so let's go buy a whole bunch of it. And that just never worked real good for the Anderson household.
We don't have warehouses for these.
That's my 2 cents. Why we got everybody here? You all do your own homework.
Anything else we want to talk about on revenue? Expenses. All right, let's move on to expenses. So the slide you see before you is our original budget for 24-25. And then the bottom line in blue is our request, which is at $565 million. And how did we get there? And so to go through each one of those, our teacher chart, years 0 through 21, there's an increase in pay for each year based on years of experience. So when it says experience roles for professionals, it's because each year you get that bump in pay. Same thing for classified, it's on a 5-year segmented chart. And so if we did it, nothing else, we would be required this year, based off of our current pay charts, to increase this almost $4 million for years of experience. And then below that, the directions given were a 4% raise. We looked at doing a 2% raise on our charts because we had other needs that we felt like needed to be addressed or had been requested as well. And so the 2% raise on all of our charts is the $10 million. Then you have your supplemental chart adjustments. And so one of our charges from our board was to specifically look at supplements, and that is additional pay outside of contract work for academic, arts, and athletics. We had community feedback that this was an area that they also had a concern for. And so in adjusting those charts, that's an additional $1.1 million of expenses. One other request was looking at some of our lower paid individuals. And so when we have holidays or week break, like spring break, our employees that are 10 and 11 month, that are not 12-month employees, do not get paid that week. And so we're looking at picking up 2 days to pay them as well. So that's $435,000. Mr. Golden already spoke to the net operational increase. And so it is $5.1 million. Of that, 6.1 is tied to Chromebooks and their carts. And then we reduced payroll lines based off of those reductions and then areas where we could. So net effect, our total, what we are asking for this year is a projected budget of $565 million. The number on the right, that's $16,367,000, are payroll related items. So the increase that you see of that, $16 million is related to payroll.
And Rachel, if I may, let me speak to this a little bit. These are projections that we gave the board. We haven't nailed down actual pay increases yet. We based our projections on the expense side based on the county government's plan. It was mentioned to the budget committee a few months ago for county government of a 4% pay increase. You may recall that I mentioned to you then, if we received that funding, we did not project that we were going to do just a straight 4% across the board. We have some goals that we're working on. This is a projection. Those things are not nailed down. But on the revenue side, we based it on what it would take for us in the aggregate to match what the mayor let you know he was planning on bringing to you for county government, that 4%. I also let you know a few months ago, our projection was we were not going to have sufficient revenue to do that. And that is where we are. We do project we're going to have sufficient revenue to meet our two obligations at the top. The experience role for professionals and experience role for classified. That is some and actually many of our positions, most of our teacher positions include an increase from experience year 3 to experience year 4, which brings with it a pay increase. That's that $3.34 million. Some of our classified positions have some roles built in after 5 years or 10 years experience, and that's that $568.
You may have said that. So within the teacher chart, going from 1 year to the next, that is a 2% increase. And then we laid a 2% on top of that. So for a teacher, for the most part, would get a 4% raise. And when I say the most part, that first year, because we're increasing yet, not necessarily. And then after year 21, the chart doesn't go past that. And so they would get a 2% raise.
Our basic plan that we introduced as a threshold to the board was we were going to put a premium on teachers compared to everybody else. But again, it's going to be finalized based ultimately on the revenue. We do have an obligation to talk to the Teachers Association through a state process. It's not a true union negotiation, but you guys may be familiar with those kinds of things where we have a professional collaboration. We plan to bring that proposal to the board again in May.
I have a question on this voucher again. I know Governor Lee promised to get that voucher bill passed, that bonuses for all the teachers, when it was it $800 and something dollars?
Thank you for that. The state included in that bill $2,000 bonus for teachers who are teaching students, if I'm not mistaken, Rachel, more than half the time. So for example, the coaches question you asked, the coaches were not included in the bonus. It's $2,000. Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, the structure that they have planned for that is they are looking at our current data for this year's teachers, and they plan to give those teachers the bonus in the next fiscal year.
Is that in this budget?
That
Unrelated.
is not.
No.
Well, you couldn't be, because if you're gonna get the money next year.
Right.
It's not, and they did tell us that as soon as they can give us, I think they're working it out themselves as to how they're going to get it to us, but they're looking at April, May, June, they're pulling data pools of our teachers at that point in time for us to verify. And then June 15th will be the last data pool, so that they can say, these are the teachers we believe you should pay. Our understanding is we'll get the money next year, but we don't know exactly when next year. Once that happens, we would come back for a budget amendment for you. But they did indicate, one of our questions had been, but they did indicate that they would also cover Social Security, Medicare, and whatever the retirement rate is as well.
On top of
the 2,000, so that we wouldn't be.
So we wouldn't have to pay that. That's another reason it's not included in the budget, in our budget. We totally separated it. There's some peculiarities to it. We will have some retirees who are totally terminated from our payroll because they've retired, and we have to go back and give them,
Reactivate.
receive the money and then pay them that $2,000 and add that. We will have somebody who moved out of state that we're gonna need to track down to give them the $2,000.
Are you saying 2026 is when it would be?
25, 26.
But see, we went through this several years ago on some other issues, I forget what it was, but you've already set the tax rates, you've already had to do all that. And then next year, whatever Rachel has got figured in for professional positions, you'll get $2,000 plus the benefits side. What was your total?
Well, it's not necessarily, because they have to be 100%, they have to be more than 50%. So if we have a 0.4 position, which that's included in your total number, they wouldn't necessarily get it.
Okay.
So you can't go specifically off of the.
So do you have an estimate? Have you done any?
We don't at this point. I have not pulled it at this point. We know roughly there's 20.
We haven't even reported details to our staff because it's still so up in the air.
There are questions, and the bulletin they actually put out is that we're working through some of our own questions. One of which was, we do have teachers that are paid with federal funds, but this is a state initiative. And one of the state's questions, would they be willing to help with the teachers that are paid out of federal funds? If not, then you could have teachers that we would have to consider, you pick up that cost.
So as we get closer to the budget time, do you think you'll have more?
I think April 15th, as soon as they do a poll and they're supposed to submit that back to us, that will give us an idea of what they're looking at and what they're actually.
Because it could be several $1 million.
I would guess somewhere around 4.
But it's not like we can use it to apply to this, it's got to go
It has
to
to
each
go.
of those.
And they will
two.
specifically tell us who qualifies. So
We
it's-
actually, as part of the legislation, it actually requires school systems to sign the board to vote that they will use those funds for that purpose. And we have to do that by June. We talked about putting it on the agenda next month. Assuming it doesn't affect our budget and put any obligations on us, it makes sense to do it.
But Jason, am I wrong in assuming the money's fungible?
Well, the intent, as I read the law, was the state included that as part of their voucher ESA program to get the legislatures. It was a package that they voted on.
Well, I understand, but if the commission has to vote for this,
Oh, from the,
and you knew that 4 million or whatever that number's coming in, it's just a matter of fungible if you knew when it was gonna arrive here in January or March, or I know that's kind of rolling the dice a little bit, but it's still fungible. That money comes in, the commission has to vote it. When it comes to you guys, it has to come to us to get it into the budget.
that's true, but it's effectively a pass-through.
It's a pass-through, but it would seem to me if money, I've always thought money was fungible. Might have to spend it over here, but over here they're gonna cover it. So long as when that money comes in, y'all don't have other needs for it. I'd like to rather see the
I see what
commission,
you're saying.
I'd rather have the commission earmark that money for whatever.
We'll double check, because I understand the way the legislature structured it, we have to treat it as a pass-through.
Yeah.
But the timing of it may make it different.
Well, let it stop at us rather than you.
Quick question, because you also mentioned the Social Security and the Medicare too as part of that, but that is something that we currently pay, right? So that would come to us to cover some of the operational expenses
For what, Medicare?
for the teachers.
They
No.
pay.
We pay it.
Okay, but
Yeah.
it's still part of your operational budget, right? So there would be an offset there, just that the bonuses have to go directly to the teacher.
As we understand it from them, they would project out that total and actually
Okay.
include that. It wouldn't just be 2,000, it would be 2,000 plus that. I think the intent of the legislature was that there would not be an additional burden on the county government.
Keep me
Right.
whole.
So a portion of that would come back to you guys.
And then
We
in
turn
that
around and pay
example, we
back
pay it to the Social Security
Medicare.
Administration.
True that.
So in summary on the expenses, I changed your notes a
Oh,
little
it went
bit
from 86 to
because we
85.
added the cards. So, the breakdown, again, this is pretty consistent. It's 85% of our budget is spent on personnel and 15% on the operational side. Page 15 in your packet is the summary sheet for general purpose school fund that shows the revenue expenses, and then the calculation you see out to the side includes our estimated fund balances in March 18th. And so $4 million was added to that estimated fund balance. We were, I think when our board first got the packet for this month, it was at 15. There was an addition made by the board, an amendment to the budget that increased it to 16, and then we have added that $4 million again for fund balance. And so our current gap, meaning we do not have enough funds available to do, what our budget is asking to do, is short by $12,085,648.
You've got estimated fund balances of March 18th. What about June 30th?
Glad you asked that. So March 18th is the last day I ran it with a projection, so we are projecting out through June. So this would include anything projected out through June. I put that in there. I run this about every day because we're tweaking constantly as POs close, as we add things to try to project out what that fund balance is going to be. And so I have said it publicly, and I'll say it again, fund balance, if you're just thinking about it, is kind of like your savings account. You have your checking account, you're operating out of it, and fund balance is the savings account that sits over there. And if we need to bring some money into checking to cover, great. We have money extra left over, we put it into fund balance. And so that number is constantly changing every day, multiple times a day. So I put the March 18th because that's when I ran it to be able to send you all the packet.
So I will tell you, one thing we do about this time of year, we'll check all our purchase orders, and if we were in the process, if we were purchasing something that in the budget year to help students this year, and we're in the fourth quarter, we're not gonna buy it because the time has already run. That's one big chunk of what we do with fund balance. Another one is what Rachel alluded to, which is if we have a purchase order, say you have $1,000 purchase order, you bought something for $985, there's that $15 gap. She closes out the purchase order so that we can get a good estimate of what we can expect from fund balance.
So real quick question on your 2%. So that's for all of the teachers too, right?
Yes.
So are you, and I think I read in there that there's some folks that weren't going to, were gonna be getting lower raises, or how, I may have interpreted that correctly. Can you explain to me like how you're making sure the teachers get closer to the 4%?
Sure. So we don't have the visual of the teacher pay chart, but it has cells for teacher levels of experience and teacher degrees. With each of those cells, every year, a teacher moves up 1 year in experience. So you might go from year 3 to year 4. That carries with it a pay increase. We are talking about increasing all those cells. And so they vary a little bit from cell to cell, but generally speaking, we project that based on those cells, the teacher raises are gonna be more than the others because that 2% Rachel's talking about is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not just the 2%. It's 2% on the chart, which would actually bump up the pay for the teacher, the cell increase plus that 2%.
So you could have a teacher, because our chart only runs through 21 years. A teacher at 25 years, they're already off the chart. And so their raise, because there's not an actual step increase, they're already off of it, they would get a 2% raise.
So the projection that we've given as a preliminary to the board is some of the highest paid employees would be at a lower percentage. Some of those in the mid-range or the lower paid would be at a higher percentage.
So I will say, the reason part of why do you not run out the chart, why do you just not keep it running out? One of the initiatives that our HR department looked at was retention. And so they felt like giving a bump at the year 21, a larger bump. So it's not just a 2%, and I don't remember off the top. 8% in that year from 2021. Was if I have a teacher that's at 15 years and I'm kind of going, I'm burnt out and I don't know that I want to keep doing this, but if I get to 20, I get a really big bump, I might hang in there. And then once you get to 20, retirement is based on your top 5 years, your highest 5 years. So once I get to 20, well, if I can get this 8% these next 5 years, I can hang on. So the teachers that have that 15 to 25 year experience, that was targeted at them. It's to say, hey, let's get you in here. Plus the fact we can hire teachers at a higher rate. Before, when the chart was at 20 and it was just the standard, you could have someone move in from out of state and they would make less money here than maybe in another county. And so it was more advantageous to them to go somewhere else. Because that 21 rate is higher, it got there sooner, we're hoping to get those experienced teachers to commit to Williamson County versus going somewhere else because they can get that amount.
So we had multiple competing factors. When we started working on this in conversations with the board, what we worked off is county government's aim towards bringing to you a 4% pay increase. So we looked at what that number meant for us, and then we gave the board some scenarios that ultimately we're gonna ask them to vote for in May. What Rachel gave you is a scenario that we're projecting. I do anticipate in the discussions that we have with the board, especially in May, and even discussions we had in preparing this budget, we're gonna have some tweaks to this. But the net effect for budgeting purposes is, we took that proposed 4%, and we took that revenue amount that we knew we didn't have without y'all's help, and it gave the board a projection of what that would look like. And that slide she gave you earlier, 3.3 million of it has to go to the teacher role. 560 million of it has to go to the classified role. And that happens to be close to $12 million. That leaves that additional amount for us to work with to try to address market conditions and needs. One of the priorities the board gave us was supplements for arts supplements, et cetera. So we're gonna be taking that, if we receive it from you, and prioritize it for retention and marketing needs. Not market condition needs, not marketing needs, but market condition needs. But that's the other element that the board actually has to make a decision on.
And I gave a scenario, but you could also have someone that was at 22 years, they may be getting more than 4% because with the bump at 21 being a greater bump, we can go back and say, okay, you should be high, and it would be higher because that number's higher now than where you were when you were at 22. So there's tons of different scenarios with it, but generally speaking, there's only a handful of people that would not get it.
I have a question.
Hi.
This about cafeteria workers, office workers, are they 2%?
We haven't made that decision yet. And we haven't touched the cafeteria budget, but the budget is self-contained, so we have to evaluate what we can afford there. Likewise, our school-age childcare, that's a self-contained budget, and we'll have to evaluate that. So we have not.
But what about like the office workers, bookkeepers?
And there, it is a 2% on the chart now, but then some of them would be going from 5 years to 6 years. So they're also in an experienced role situation.
Oh, so that does affect them, how many years, okay.
That's the scenario we made. So it's gonna, our draft proposal to the board includes some getting more than others based on our market condition practice and need.
Okay.
But again, what we've done with this is we've addressed the proposed revenue portion that you all are proposing, and the burden and responsibility is on the board to determine what we do.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, did you have any more questions?
Yeah, just real quick, because I know that obviously we all want to get more money in the teachers' pockets, like full stop. But I think that, you know, I think I saw a statistic that right now our administration and people kind of at the higher end are like rating the top 3 in the state, and our teachers are still like 27.
Yeah.
So I guess my concern is like, are we doing more to really get our teachers, you know, taken care of? And I know you went through, you know, a lot of work, obviously, to address the pay scales and, which I appreciate, but is that going to help kind of close that gap so our teachers here feel like we really are giving them the focus that they need so they want to stay?
Yeah. Our per pupil expenditure statewide, based on last year's numbers, we're in the mid-70s ranking for the schools. 147, 148 school systems, depending on how the state counts it. We, in the most recent data, were $12 below the state average, somewhere in the 70s. Our teachers are at 27 for pay ranking. Our administrators are in the top 5. We have put a focus on leadership, and we think that's important. And we've talked about making sure that our administrators at least have the capacity to live locally. So those numbers are basically true that you mentioned, and it's been intentional. We have put our money in towards our people. So compared to other systems, just visualize that. We're somewhere in the 50th percentile, and around ranked in somewhere in the 70s with our per pupil, and yet our teachers are at 27th in the state. Because we're putting, from a ratio perspective, more towards our teachers. We still have room to grow. And that's a discussion we've had with the board. That's in part why we haven't nailed down exactly what we would do with the funding if we were able to receive it from you. And we have, in our models, focused on increasing teacher pay, because that is the key. We're 27th now with a funding in the 70s. We do believe we can do better.
The last thing I just wanted to mention too is like, have we gotten any new numbers in? I know one of the things that we've discussed pretty heavily is like health insurance, like new rates on health insurance, because that's definitely an area that there's a potential to save money.
I can-
And so I know Gina says she's been working on RFPs for that.
I could speak on the school side, and there may be some on the county side. Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, the amount we have in the budget that you can actually see on page 3, is our total amount, did not include any additional per person increases. So we do know that. The information we got from county government, we did not include an increase in cost. Beyond that, that's a county government.
Commissioner Lennox?
Commissioner Hayes, but thank you. I have a question. So just so I understand, you were talking about the cells, which I
Yeah.
don't quite follow exactly, but so the 2% would be a base 2%, and then the other 2%, you'll be looking at some of the lower paid teachers to see how you can make adjustments based on years of experience, degrees and things like that. Did I understand
Well,
that?
so let me answer it a different way.
Okay.
When Mayor Anderson told you he intended, when he presented you with county government budget, a 4% pay increase. We knew we weren't gonna have enough revenue to do that, so we took the total 4% aggregate and we looked at what we could potentially do with it if we had the funding. 3.3 million already goes towards the role based on our current teachers. And so that's a portion of it. And so when Rachel mentions a 2% increase on the cells, I just want to reemphasize, that's a bit of a misnomer, because teachers who are on the chart up to 21 years of experience would, because of our negotiations and our commitments to the Teachers Association, already receive some pay increase. So when she says a 2%, we're really looking at, depending on the cells, somewhere around 4, a couple of the cells might be at 8, that kind of thing.
Because 2% of a 40,000 pay and a 20,000 are very different, so.
Well, and 2% of 45,000 is different from 2% of 42,000.
Correct.
So that
But
it's,
you're looking to
it's,
spread that 2% additional amongst the lower pay to bring them up a little better.
that's correct.
Okay.
And I apologize for us giving that scenario, because it's a scenario
Just
and
want
it
to
can
make
be,
sure I understand.
without you seeing the pay charts, it can be confusing.
And is there any kind of criteria that a greater detail that you can provide or you're going to provide to the board? I mean, I wasn't sure.
Yes, we've actually had some board members ask us questions about that preliminary. I anticipate there'll be some changes when we bring it to them in May. But from a budgeting standpoint, on the revenue side, we have limited in our budget that 4% that the mayor introduced to you that he would be asking of you for county government.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Madam Chairman, if I could get Jason, the 12 million current gap that you're asking for, realizing there's still some money on the table that's gonna come from the state. The reimbursement of $2,000 per head based on the Tischler model, if they're teaching 50%, all those other things. But at that current 12 million, how much is that converted over into a tax rate?
Number one, let me answer that 2,000. That state's $2,000 bonus is not included in this budget at all.
Got it.
Second, Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, the current penny is worth about 1.8 million for us. So John Mack with the finance person.
7 cents.
Yeah, about 6 2/3 pennies, so 7.
Just for this year's budget.
And now you're seeing the results of the 5% on the reappraisal, how that's affecting you.
And that would include us doing a pay increase similar to the county administration's plan to bring to you.
As you go through their detail, you'll see a lot of accounts do have the change at the bottom, the percentage change, or drops. A lot of it is related to payroll. We really work super, super hard to try to get, I have said that before, I'm just telling you, we work really, really hard to try to get as accurate a projection as we could on this fund balance, harder than we've ever done that. And then as far as cuts within the operation side, what we can do. So I feel like what you see before you, a lot of times you ask that question, well, how much do you think? What you see is, this is it. This is as close as we can give you right now. I mean, this would be it. Little things changed. Our mileage rate increased. Our reimbursement for mileage goes up. And so that's all across the board. So you'll see that. But there's not just tons of changes within the document itself that's not related to payroll. So that's really all the discussion I have for you on the expense side. And if you have questions, please do ask them.
I have a question. The big discussion about the books from the school board meeting, how much were those books you're talking about that the school board disagrees with the teachers on?
They're in this year's budget, and it was a little over $5 million.
So what happens if we just cut that out and went with the ones last year? Could we do that since there's such a disagreement on which books are the right books?
Our current science curriculum is online educational resources, OER, that we did, I'm estimating 8 years ago. We cannot continue with online educational resources. The state's gotten stricter about curriculum. We go through the approval process. Theoretically, we could present something online that met every standard to go through the state approval process, but it would have had to start close to a year ago. We made the decision a year ago with this current year's budget that it's time to go back to textbooks rather than the online. So somehow, some way, we're going to need science textbooks. And our board made a decision. There were multiple choices that the state textbook and the Middle Block Commission gave as choices. And the teachers and the committee made a recommendation, and the board in part followed the recommendation, in part made a decision based on their vote that they had the authority to do. Our plan is to buy the textbooks.
I guess I feel very uncomfortable spending $5 million when the teachers don't approve of some of these. The teachers are the ones in the classroom teaching these children. They were responsible for the results. So what happens if we cut it out? Y'all just,
You're talking about cutting it out of the current budget, not next year, not the budget we're presenting to you.
It was budgeted in 24-25, knowing that we would be purchasing this time of year. So it was included in.
It's not in this year's budget.
Not the document you have before you.
I'm sorry, I'm pointing, it's not in the 25-26 budget. We budget ahead of the adoption cycle so that we can purchase during the year to be prepared for next year.
but we could cut it this year and y'all would have to not cut it for next year so you wouldn't buy for this year. I just feel very uncomfortable. I've seen so much about this and teachers so upset. I guess, they're the ones that's responsible.
I respect what you're saying. It's something obviously that we need to work through.
And now I'd like to see some more discussion on that at the board about that.
I will tell you again, the commission already approved that budget
I know,
last year.
I know. But we can cut this one too. and you'd have to scrape the money up.
Do we know if we got the approximately $3,000 that we should get instead of the 4,300 to make it, 72 or whatever? What difference would that make if the state gave us all the money that we should be getting?
We've actually done that on our calculators just in moments. Rachel's redoing
It's
that.
another $120 million.
$120 million.
So we just need to go tell our state legislators to give us the money they should give us.
Thank you.
Sounds to me like we just need to get, right now, just need enough money to cover that gap that we've got right now.
Uh-huh.
So even if it's only $300, we cover the gap, so it's a good start, right?
I think we should try to get it all. If we pay it in, we should get it.
Yep.
We wouldn't have to have tax increases for how many years?
Shoot, to pay our law enforcement enough. Help us. Quick question on the Chromebooks, because I know there was a discussion around that too, and I know that you guys made a decision, or the board made a decision to cut the Chromebooks out for K through 2.
That's correct.
Is there further discussion on possibly taking those out all the way up to 5th grade? Because I know, I'm just gonna be like, I've had lots of parents, conversations with it, and they're like, yes, please. And I don't know if we've done a survey with parents to see how they feel about it, but that, obviously I'm talking to a few folks, not a lot, across the district, but that is a pretty significant cost savings if we didn't get everyone 1-for-1.
Long-term, we do intend to have conversations. So our technology department has a cycle where we're replacing those devices at the high school, middle, and elementary level. We did include in this budget that we would not replace the K through 2 computers. We've got older computers that are basically at end of life, but our plan was, because we evaluated how much our K through 2 students are actually using them in the classroom, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes a day, that we could get by using the old ones and trade out, use those that were basically in better shape. Brian, I'm paraphrasing this badly because I know some of it has to do with updates and whether you can even use it once something's been updated. And purchase new ones just for 3 through 5. We also included in that for the last 6 years or so, all our students have been taking them home with them. We included to do what we could in the short term to reduce passive screen time, outside of school screen time, those carts, so that no elementary student would have to take them home. What we know as an administration is there are state computer science standards, and we have an obligation to still meet those standards. So administratively, in the short term, we can manage this, and then in the longer term, we can evaluate those replacements, knowing that we'll have that replacement cycle. If things change at the state, or if we project out, well, we can maybe reduce the ratio a little bit, it may enable us to not buy as many in the coming year or the next year for replacement cycles. So short term, we've reduced it. Long term, I think there'll be some more discussions. It's interesting to me in this context, just a few years ago, the push has been hard towards computer literacy, hence the state standards. In the last year or two, there's been a lot of discussion and some new research coming out about screen time. It's interesting that the states, so there's conflict there. The state computer standards start in the context of K through 5 computer literacy with a preface that basically says children come to the school system in kindergarten averaging about 2.5 hours a day on devices before they even get to us. And the intent of the computer standards are to start teaching responsible use of a device rather than whatever they've been doing before they showed up, right? So it's that conflict that we're dealing with. It's a long-term issue.
Yeah, I know, I've seen some of the data on it too, and the studies on the screen time, and I remember taking my kids to the pediatrician when they were little, and that was one of the first questions we got, is limiting screen time.
Yeah.
So I know there's been concern by parents to say, well, we're supposed to limit our screen time based on what the pediatric system is saying. Why are we giving them so much screen time at school, and then they're bringing them home with them at the same time? So, and obviously it's a significant cost too, so there's the fiduciary side of it also.
And what we found is in the data that we started gleaning and monitoring actual time with devices. It's not all day that our students are on there. The youngest grades, it's in the 30 to 45-minute range. Of course, as you get into high school, it's more. But that is something we're going to be talking about long term.
Expensive device for 30 to 45 minutes a day.
Yeah, but it's meeting the state standards, and that's why we're actually reducing the ratio, and we're not purchasing K2 this year.
So I guess the question is, how do we cover the $12 million gap? Is that the big question?
What?
How are we gonna cover the $12 million gap?
I say,
Is it cost
call,
savings?
everybody needs to call their representatives and ask them to get us that money they owe us.
Is there a potential though to look at our health insurance? Is there gonna possibly be an increase there with the RFPs that have gone out?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, once you go through I think we had 8 or 9 firms that expressed an interest, but as soon as that decision is made, then we'll look at our health insurance. But health insurance costs are going up. Don't expect a miracle that we're gonna see a lot of changes. Some people have suggested looking at the state plan's going up. They're all going up, so I hate to sit here and give you false hope, on the health insurance cost. We feel like we can manage it, but we'll just have to wait and see. The health insurance costs are some of the highest costs going across the country right now.
Well, Jason and Rachel, I've never seen a budget like this where you reduce teachers, so I think y'all tried and done a good job on it, thank you.
And we listen, we do listen, we try. And we understand, I'm speaking for all of us, but we understand exactly the position you're in, which you understand the position. But it's,
I am happy to see the supplements, going out. I think that's gonna definitely make the teachers feel better. So I'm glad to see you guys were able to add that.
Well, it's interesting that you say that make them feel better. We found that from a market standpoint, supplements were ahead, but the dollar value is so small. Letting them know we value them and it meets our vision statement is important.
Yeah, it's just,
Well,
I'm sure.
Jason, maybe you can't answer this, but with the adjustments they've done in Metro Davidson County, how do our teachers compare with Davidson County teachers? How do our teachers compare with Franklin Special School teachers? How do our teachers with surrounding? And if you want to get that data back to us, I'm fine.
I can give you some generalizations. Metro and Franklin Special generally pay more for teachers. And our board has spoken to that. We want to continue to compete and continue to grow. We've been closing that gap, but it reminds me of that old line about gas stations across the street from each other, right? Every time we'll increase, we'll get that increase too. And part of it's cost of living because we're all experiencing this in Middle Tennessee. We're driven by revenue, and we put that push towards teachers. But we do lose teachers from time to time to both Franklin Special and Metro. And that's one of the reasons. Franklin Special has a higher revenue stream because they do have that extra tax. Their pupil teacher ratio is actually 13-to-1 based on state numbers, and ours is 17-to-1. So there's a lot of variables.
When they raised their taxes last year, nobody noticed.
Yeah.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes, ma'am.
you're good at those numbers. What is it per student in Franklin Special School? Cost per student in Williamson County?
I don't have that, Madam Chair, with me, but like I say, with our early conversation, Franklin Special, and we are paying over 70% local dollars for the school system. Not fair and equitable.
I was thinking last year was like 16,000 in Franklin Special, like 11,000 for the county.
It's more
I
than
can't
that.
tell you exactly,
It's
but
more
it's
than that.
close. I mean, it's like probably, the last one I saw, and this is probably not right, but about 19,000 for Franklin Special, and we're a little over
We
12.
raise a lot of money though too. I mean, we have one of the most generous counties, I think, across the board as far as the amount of, I think I was always willing to give
Yes,
to my schools. I never
yeah.
felt like it just was something that I just thought was important.
PTO and booster support is pretty wonderful here. Yes, and of course, that's not included in our budget request.
Right.
They're able to keep some of our athletics and arts programs
I've been amazed at what some of the PTO things and the booster clubs, what they can do, and I feel very, I feel like our county's blessed with people that are also very generous.
Yes.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question? Can you guys provide, us with detail with the step plan or whatever
Sure.
it is you
We'll
talk?
give you links, it's all on our website, you can go to careers and pull that up, but I'll make sure to give you guys links on that.
What I'm interested in is trying to see how it correlates. Are we talking about 4% for the general county employees and then 4% overall for, I know you're gonna distribute it differently, but is that the way it's really going to them? Are the teachers actually, are there people getting more than that overall? Or is, I need an explanation to understand those numbers.
From a percentage standpoint, without us having a final vote by the board, what we projected to them was, we were gonna put some money towards supplements, so some of those teachers who are theater teachers or coaches are gonna get a little more than average. Generally speaking, from a percentage standpoint, the teachers are gonna get a little more than average. From a percentage standpoint, administrators will get less than average, but you gotta recognize that you've talked about percentages and raw numbers, so if you make more, your percentage, could balance that out. Let's see,
One of the other things that was said, think about this one too, the 10 and 11 month employees are classified employees, the non-teachers, and looking at paying them for 2 extra days. So that's not a percentage increase, but that would be 2 more days paid for the year. So it's not necessarily gonna see that on the chart either, but then that would be 2 during spring break.
and again, with the caveat that this is the model that we've introduced to the board a couple of months ago with some adjustments. So one of the issues, I'm giving you examples of some of the issues we're dealing with. Our 10-month employees don't get the traditional holidays, as many traditional holidays. 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, we added some holiday pay for them during the Christmas season. We're looking at adding a couple more holidays for them for budgeting purposes. And those are some of our lowest paid folks. Some of our board members have actually said, hey, can we bump that up another day or two so that they can have a better way to balance their budgets as 10-month employees. That's something we're looking at. Based on what you all are presented, if, whatever we do, we'll have a push or pull with our final proposal. Rachel mentioned this example, and I'm gonna put a little more meat into it. Our teacher pay chart stops at year 21. So if we have a 25-year experienced teacher in another district who's moving here, they get put in on at 21 years, and they come in as a 25-year experienced teacher making less than their 25-year experienced peers who've been working here that whole time, who've gotten those periodic raises. So we're looking at that too. That's why Rachel mentioned the potential for an 8% increase at the highest, so that we can recruit potentially some of those better experienced teachers a little bit better than we have in the past. All those things are pushing and pulling that the board has to make a decision on if we receive this rate.
We have a kind of a similar issue, at least all employees matter for the county, but in law enforcement. But we don't have a similar way to do that for them. So, people are coming in where they're coming in, from, somebody 15 years and then an agency comes to the sheriff's department, they're coming in at that bottom level.
Yeah.
So,
Which means that you can't recruit.
Right. So I'm thinking about some of those other hard to fill, hard to retain.
Do we want to do the cafeteria and vote on that today, or do we need to?
We advertised we were not voting.
Okay.
We can briefly go through them very fast. Cafeteria and our extended schools program are totally self-sufficient, meaning they generate their own revenues to cover their expenses. And so revenue projected at 19.4, expenses at 20.8. They have no gap, they have sufficient fund balance. They have actually, they run the risk, as a reminder of having excess fund balance at the end. They cannot they can only have so much fund balance. And so the fact that they eat into it is actually a good thing, in this case. We have not increased the rates since 1819 for what we're charging for the meals. They've been able to, our director, James Rometty, does a really good job, and they've been able to manage even with increased food costs.
But you could increase them at 4% with having,
That's available in their budget. And again, we never request funding from you for the food service budget. That's a combination of revenues from sales and federal.
Just a quick question about that. Is there a way that you could use that to actually pay those folks a little bit more?
To pay them, yes.
Because they're their own revenue fund, we couldn't take money from them per se, put into
Right,
general purpose,
but
but
to
for
pay
them, you could.
the folks, 'cause I mean, that's not, it's usually on the lower end, and
We're driven by market there too as well. But yes, there is sufficient funding there to cover a
Extended school care, extended school program. Projected revenue of 7.5, expenses of 8. Again, they also have sufficient fund balance, so they would have no gap. The only thing that they changed this year in their projections is in the past, staffing had become an issue with drop-ins. And they are looking at picking back up and adding the drop-in capability, meaning may not necessarily use the program every day, but there could be an extenuating circumstance where a parent would need to leave their child at school later for whatever reason. But they're looking at having caps on that so they don't get into where there's not sufficient staffing for it. That was the only change for them.
And by the way, this also receives no county revenue. This is from fees, usage fees.
but this doesn't have the raise in it, possible raise, or 2 or 4.
But 2% has already been calculated in both cafeteria and.
That still leaves that $1 million fund balance.
But y'all
So
could possibly, you think, give them a little more?
it's possible.
After
yes.
you get closer to
Yes,
the
ma'am.
budget, okay.
And then the last section is our annual capital request. When you're looking at this summary sheet, just provided you last year's information in the first 2 columns, and then the highlighted across the bottom in yellow are the totals we would be asking for this year. Again, it's broken down between general and rural because we have FSD that also qualifies within the county, and we have to keep that funding separate, and so that's why you have the separate columns for it. Anything pretty much related, I shouldn't say pretty much, anything related to the section, the building improvements are pretty self-explanatory as to what they are for, but then anything related to that second section, the question came up about computers, why are we putting computers here? This is more things like smart boards and printers and technology for the teachers, that kind of thing versus Chromebooks, so that's not a duplicate request.
And if I may, Rachel, this annual capital budget, we've had some discussions over the years where sometimes things get in it and sometimes they're removed. And that includes a relationship to our 5-year capital plan as well, where you might see school buses in it, or sometimes you see roofs. This is a reminder, we have 51 campus schools, and something needs to be replaced every year. And I know it's tough, all right, because of the annual capital, but we need to make these requests just from a maintenance standpoint.
And I remember, I was thinking it was last year, you did one like this, and then there was another one for like capital. So what's,
We do have in our 5-year capital plan some other projects that are not traditionally maintaining our buildings projects. So if we do an expansion, that kind of thing, we will include those in our 5-year capital plan.
are you gonna let us know anytime, kind of what you're thinking about for those, so we can look at that with this?
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions for the budget committee?
All right, seeing none from the Education Committee, I believe that concludes our presentation from the school.
My email address is in that memo. Y'all are gonna have questions. Please email me, call me, Mr. Golden, and we will gladly answer anything that you have additional questions on.
We want to adjourn.
Adjourned, but no man say we left a stone unturned in our discussion. Thank you.
And can I get a motion to adjourn for the? Thank you.